Today, a cracked chair leg or a jammed drawer usually means a quick trip to the curb and an online order for a replacement. But decades ago, fixing a broken household item started with the sound of a heavy wooden lid opening and the distinct smell of machine oil and sawdust. The modern American garage is often filled with lithium-ion batteries, brushless motors, and advanced power tools. Yet, despite owning more automated equipment than any previous generation, we actually fix significantly fewer things. Half a century ago, a basic kit of hand tools was a household necessity. These objects functioned as physical proof of a baseline cultural expectation that things would eventually break down through daily use, and that the owner was responsible for putting them back together. Entire neighborhoods were built around this reality. Local hardware stores carried individual replacement parts, bulk screws, and specialized fittings, serving as supply depots for routine home maintenance rather than showrooms for entirely new appliances. Fixing a broken track on a kitchen cabinet with manual leverage took serious elbow grease, but that friction created a quiet underlying confidence, a mechanical self-reliance that shaped everyday mid-century domestic life. Before a single saw blade touched a piece of pine, a repair demanded strict spatial foresight. You couldn't just cut away and hope for the best. Accuracy was the invisible foundation of every successful project. Tools like the square and plumb bob forced you to lock down exact dimensions. If you estimated a joint and were off by 1/8 of an inch, that tiny error compounded with every step. By the time you reached the end of the board, your rough guess had ruined the entire repair. You had to physically unfold measuring tools, extending their wooden segments and brass hinges across the lumber. Extracting accurate spatial data meant handling the tool deliberately, relying entirely on your own eyes and careful alignment rather than a digital readout. Because measuring took physical effort, it naturally slowed the pace of the work. It transformed what could have been a rushed fix into a calculated, deliberate operation. A modern impact driver sinks a screw with the effortless squeeze of a trigger. Decades ago, reshaping wood or metal demanded raw physical exertion. You relied on human-powered friction and leverage to force a material to change its shape. Driving a crosscut saw through a thick piece of oak required whole-body muscle memory. You had to constantly align your shoulder, elbow, and wrist to keep the blade perfectly straight so it wouldn't bind in the curve. There was an immediate tactile feedback loop between the hands and the wood. Adjust the hand plane iron by a fraction of a millimeter, shift the angle of your grip, and you dictated whether you produced a jagged gouge or a smooth, translucent wood shaving. Boring a hole required a brace and bit. You applied steady downward pressure with one hand, while sweeping the other in a wide, slow arc. It took concentrated torque just to drive a single bit through a framing stud. Because the physical cost of altering these materials was so high, every cut and every drilled hole carried heavy weight. You didn't make disposable trial runs, you committed to the action. Once the pieces were cut and prepped, putting a broken object back together was an exercise in pure mechanical advantage. You had to translate the rotation of your wrist into clamping force. This required an arsenal of flathead screwdrivers and open-end wrenches and specialized pliers. If you grabbed a wrench that was slightly too large or a flathead that was too narrow, you stripped the hardware and damaged the piece. A standard home kit held a staggering variety of gripping and fastening tools, from heavy C-clamps to fine needle nose pliers. These specific variations provided the level of specialized leverage required to manage a traditional household. Mastering these fasteners meant understanding exactly how things were built. When you know which wrench tightens a plumbing fitting and which screwdriver secures a cabinet hinge, you demystify the everyday machinery of the household. The repair mindset didn't stop with the furniture or the plumbing. The tools themselves were lifelong assets that demanded their own regular maintenance. When a chisel chipped or a handsaw grew dull, you didn't throw it out. You pulled out a file and a sharpening stone, spending hours grinding away the blunt steel to restore a razor-sharp edge. This habit extended to the hardware. Basements and garages were lined with old baby food jars and coffee cans, creating a hyper-organized personal archive of odd bolts, saved screws, and hinges waiting for an unforeseen repair. Real domestic self-reliance included the constant, disciplined maintenance of the underlying ecosystem of steel, oil, and spare parts that kept the house running in the first place. There is no need to romanticize the aching shoulders and blistered hands of the past. Modern power tools are undeniably superior at saving hours of labor, standardizing cuts, and sparing our joints from unnecessary wear and tear. The demand for strict exactness hasn't disappeared. That discipline has transitioned into modern, highly efficient workshops where streamlined professional gear allows for even tighter tolerances. But as we outsourced the physical effort to electric motors and filled our homes with mass-produced disposable goods, we surrendered a quiet sense of pride. We traded away our instinct for autonomous problem-solving. The heavy, oiled tools sitting at the bottom of a vintage chest prove that our relationship with the objects we own is a choice. Cultivating the patience to repair something today is a deliberate act of reclaiming independence. What was the one tool your father, mother, or grandparent never seemed to be without? Tell us down in the comments what it was and what they managed to fix with it.